What's going on, everybody? This is John Jank Gaming on the mic here, coming at you with a brand new episode of the FCS Dynasty here on NCAA 06, featuring that NCAA Next mod, and we got a fantastic episode on tap. A little bit of a special episode in my eyes personally, as we just finished all the gameplay for year number 2. Last episode we did see the national championship game along with the other 2 semi-final games to go with that as well. And now we move on to the off season, and there is a lot going on in this off season. We're going to check out some of the award winners outside of the Heisman Trophy that was released in the conference championship episode. We'll see those award winners, and then we'll also see the other All-Americans, plus a few schools that have actually been sanctioned by the NCAA, and schools that were, actually played a significant role that are relevant within this FCS Dynasty, plus of course that recruiting and how to be a custom freshman in this dynasty. I will have that information in this episode, so you're going to want to stick around for the entire thing if that's something that tickles your pickle, and if you want to have a custom player in this series. So that being said, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new. And the first thing that we're going to do is recap the playoffs here in season number 2. Let's go ahead and take a look at the finalized FCS bracket here in year number 2. Alright fellas, so this is what the final playoff bracket did end up looking like for year number 2, as we do see Kent State winning that national championship once again. But, Kent State and Eastern Carolina, their paths to the championship kind of happened in 2 separate ways. Kent State, first and foremost, they actually almost were beaten in the second round by Tennessee State, but had to make a fourth quarter comeback, almost losing to SMU as well. It was in a shootout, 38-35 was the score there, and then they got better in the semifinals and the final game as well, winning by 19 against UL Monroe, and then winning by 18 against Eastern Carolina. On the opposite side of the bracket, though, the Pirates started off really good. Eastern Carolina beating Buffalo outstandingly, and the same goes for UCF, who was one of the better opponents remaining at the time. But then they struggled a little bit towards the end. They almost lose to Central Michigan. If it was for the fact that the Chippewas had all those turnovers in the fourth quarter, we could have been talking about them in the national championship game. And then they fell apart in the second half, as they will end up finishing as this year's runner-up here in season number 2. But with that being said, the bracket challenge has been concluded. Thank you everybody who did end up participating in it this year. Moonlight on Discord did end up winning it, so I will be contacting you as well as the other challenge winner as well, in terms of getting your free custom prospects here in year number 2, having those high profile guys. So now that we have seen the entirety of the FCS bracket, as well as take a little minute to see who were the top 2 participants in the FCS challenge in terms of the bracket playoff challenge, let's go ahead and check out the award winners that is not the Heisman Trophy race. And we will start off with the Maxwell winner, who does go to junior quarterback Adam Mosley, representing for San Diego State. His squad did end up being eliminated from the FCS playoffs early. They were number 1 seed once again, and they were knocked out early once again, but he had a great year. 43 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. He threw for close to 3,800 yards. Also brings a solid overall, 84 overall, so there's a good chance that he does come back for his senior year, where I'm sure he will indeed come back with a vengeance. But a couple of guys that were right on his tails. Kenny Raymer, I think he had a serious argument to win this award, though. He does end up with over 4,000 yards passing, which did lead the NCAA down here at the FCS level, and he also had 43 total touchdowns. However, this is his senior year, and it'll be interesting to see if he gets an opportunity to play in the NFL. Finally, in third place for the Maxwell Award is Zach Gilmore, who had some Heisman hype, and rightfully so, ends up with 18 total touchdowns on the year. Moving on to the Bednarik Award, and that goes to the best defensive player in all of college football. And no surprises here, Ryan Bush, true freshman. This man was at the prom just 6 months ago. He makes an immediate impact for the South Carolina State Bulldogs. 100 tackles, 29 TFLs, 10 sacks, 3 interceptions, and 4 forced fumbles. He did everything for South Carolina State day one, and look at this. He's an 88 overall already from Willimantic, Connecticut. I would not be shocked if this man was a very high draft pick for South Carolina State when he does become draft eligible 2 seasons from now. Also in this group is Daniel Martin, the senior middle linebacker from Eastern Illinois. Did not get a chance to see the Panthers play this season within gameplay, but standing at 5'8", it's not about the size of the dog, it's the size of the bark within that dog. And did he have a big bark? 94 tackles, 16 TFLs, 5 sacks to go with it as well, a couple of interceptions, and 7 forced fumbles. He did just about everything. Speaking of doing just about everything is Marquise Thomas, the senior redshirt from the Montana Grizzlies. He finishes third here in the Bednarik Award race, and he actually is the Lombardi winner, so a little bit of a spoiler for later on here in the awards portion. The senior redshirt ends up with 15 sacks on the year, as well as 6 forced fumbles. He was an absolute menace. That being said, though, outside of the finalist race, though, we do see one of your custom guys finish in the top 10 for one of these award races. DeMarcus McNeil, the freshman linebacker from Jacksonville State, just his first year on the field, and makes a huge difference. 90 tackles, 23 TFLs, 7 sacks, and also has multiple interceptions and forced fumbles to go with it. By the way, guys, if you're interested to see how your custom player did here in season number 2, I will have a Google Sheet link down in the pinned comments section, and it will be right next to the template that will be used in order to create your custom prospect moving into year number 3, where you will be taking over one of these true freshmen that are coming in from the high school ranks. As for the best quarterback in the nation, once again, Andy Mosley does get it. He does also win the Maxwell Award as well. But sitting in second place, though, we do see Travis Wilkerson, the junior quarterback from Alcorn State, who should come back for his senior year. He ends up with 45 total touchdowns and nearly 4,300 passing yards. Help really bolster the profile of Alcorn State, really, if you think about it, as you want to talk about a guy that helped with a second half push. This was Travis Wilkerson, and then also him throwing it to Michael Horn. That was a special combination. He does have one more year of eligibility, and I do believe that we should end up seeing this young man again from Fairfield Shores, Florida, for his senior year. Finally, to round out the award finalists for the best quarterback in the nation, Kenny Raymer does once again finish in third place. We'll see if he ends up in the NFL, but Raymer on multiple finalist lists. As for the Walker Award, we will end up seeing Josh Harris win the award this year. Representing for Eastern Carolina, he ends up with roughly almost 1,700 yards of total offense on the year, plus 23 touchdowns to go with it as well. He was a really big reason why Eastern Carolina did make it all the way to the national championship game this season, and almost helping the Pirates beat Kent State and get their first national championship in this dynasty so far. As for Ivan Jenkins, he ends up finishing in second place for the Mean Green, and he was a bright spot in what was a disappointing year for the Mean Green. They do not make it to the FCS playoffs despite starting off in the preseason ranked in the top 25. And then, of course, finishing in third place, we got Zach Gilmore, who was also a finalist for the Maxwell. Again, really great year for Zach Gilmore. He was shut down by Eastern Carolina, and that was why Central Florida, they were blown out in the quarterfinal by Eastern Carolina. Moving on to the best wide receiver in the country for the second year in a row, it does end up going to wide receiver John Reed. Now, we did get a chance to see John Reed play in gameplay, but unfortunately, that Chattanooga squad, a little bit up and down yet again. They were better than last year, but even though John Reed doesn't put up the same numbers as he did year one, it's still a really impressive season, honestly. 95 catches, 1,500 yards, 18 receiving touchdowns. So he has 37 touchdowns in the past 2 years alone. And while he isn't considered on the NFL radar, I would not be shocked if he ends up playing, some sort of, professional football, whether it be in the Canadian Football League or even in these spring leagues such as the XFL and the USFL that recently popped up, because he definitely deserves that kind of opportunity at the very least. As for who was also on the finalist list, we saw Brian Pruitt, who finishes in second place. He ends up with 1,300 yards receiving and 15 touchdowns, was a Heisman finalist. And then Maurice Gray, the veteran on what was a really loaded James Madison receiving core, he still ends up shining in his senior campaign. 58 catches, 1,200 yards, and 14 touchdowns. That is also an improvement from last year, where he was seen as more as a return specialist. Maurice Gray really showing the all-around abilities. And the most interesting thing about this best wide receiver list is that Michael Horn wasn't even considered a finalist. He finishes in 4th place, and he was someone that actually won the Heisman Trophy. So kind of crazy to think about, not all voters are on the same wavelength, but it doesn't change the fact that Michael Horn also had an incredible season this year. As for the best tight end in America, that goes to the true freshman Mike Crum, as the Crum Bucket ends up with 35 catches, 486 yards, and 7 touchdowns, just entering his first year of eligibility. He's looking like a bona fide NFL prospect, definitely someone to watch out for as his college career progresses, as is Northwestern State tight end Aiden Rose. Again, a number one of your custom guys. He ends up with a pretty solid freshman year, despite the fact that Northwestern State, they do predicate themselves more towards the run than anything. Aiden Rose still ends up with 30 catches, 513 yards, and 6 touchdowns, which is really darn good if you ask me, for the fact that he is still just a true freshman, so he has at least 2 more years before he even becomes draft eligible. Rounding out this incredible group of freshman tight ends, we got Brian White from Southern. He ends up with 37 catches, 574 yards, and 6 touchdowns. The 6'7" man was a great target for Mike Hill over the course of this season, and again, a guy that was simply a bad man, representing Weiser, Idaho extremely well. Moving on to the offensive linemen, in terms of what the best offensive linemen were, Mark Moore does end up winning it this year. He ends up with nearly 100 pancakes. He was closing in on that. 90 pancakes versus just 10 sacks allowed. Josh Brigham, he ends up finishing in second place, 78 pancakes versus just a few sacks. And then finally, Marcus Johnson, true freshman, by the way, the only freshman in this finalist list, ends up with 68 pancakes, but just 2 sacks allowed. So a pretty good debut season for Marcus Johnson, as he was part of one of the best offensive lines in America. As for the Remington, that goes to the best center in the country, and that goes to Jeremy King, also representing for North Dakota State. So when it comes to the offensive line awards, that does end up getting swept by the Bison. He ends up with 28 pancakes for 4 sacks on the year, so a well-deserved season for Jeremy King. But Warren Ingram was testing him pretty well, and he also had slightly more pancakes and slightly less sacks, so I'm actually surprised that they didn't go towards Warren Ingram's way. But still, I mean, for a true freshman to already be considered for the Remington, that's a huge deal. And I'm sure one of the main reasons why he didn't win the award was just because he's a freshman and he's not a well-known name as, say, a Jeremy King. But I'm sure he will win at least one Remington award in his college career as long as he can remain healthy. As for who will be the third finalist for the Remington, that does end up being Justin Smith, who ends up with 24 pancakes and 4 sacks. A solid offensive lineman for this Montana squad, but did fail to make the playoffs. Now moving on to the Lombardi Award, and this was something that was already thrown out there, because he was a finalist for the Bednarik to go with it. Marquise Thomas, he does end up winning that Lombardi Award and ending his college career on a high note. The senior redshirt will be able to take at least one award home, but Stephen Green was right on his heels, though. He also had a great campaign. The junior from James Madison, 34 TFLs, more than half of them were actually sacks. He ends up with 19 sacks on the year, and that does include the conference championship game as well as the second round matchup against Central Michigan. And he does have that defensive touchdown, which I do believe is from that playoff matchup as well. So really shining when the lights are the brightest. You certainly love to see that. And then Aaron Turner will round out the finalist group as the senior from San Diego State ends up with double-digit sacks as well. He had 11 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. It lined up finishing in third place for the Lombardi Award. Moving on now to the best linebacker in America, and that is, of course, going to go to Ryan Bush, who also won the Begnaret, which does go to the best defensive player in America. So really not surprised by these top two of Ryan Bush as well as Daniel Martin. But in third place, a true freshman from Indiana State, Mike Terry. Now, Indiana State, they certainly have a little bit brighter of a future. Remember, back in year number 1, Indiana State did not win a single game. And while the Sycamores still did not finish above 500, they look a whole lot better than what they did in year 1. And Mike Terry was a huge reason for that. He was the captain of this defense for the Sycamores. Meanwhile, DeMarcus McNeil also was on at least the semi-finalist list for the best linebacker. He does also finish in 5th place among this talented group of linebackers. Up next, we got the Jim Forpay Award, which does go to the best defensive back in college football, and that is going to go to senior strong safety Rodney Cook, representing for Harvard. So not only an incredibly smart young man, but also getting it done on the football field. He ends up with 71 tackles, 14 of which end up being TFL, 4 sacks, a couple of interceptions, and 3 forced fumbles to go with it. He really stepped up from season number 1, where he just had the 1 interception, and he will likely consider putting his name in for the NFL draft. And if that doesn't work out, he's a smart kid, Harvard graduate. I'm sure he'll have a bright future no matter what happens to him on the football field in the future. As for the other finalists, that goes to true freshman Tim O'Connor, who definitely flew under the radar because, Stephen F. Austin, they are playing in a smaller conference, and they weren't exactly, at the top of the conference, to put it nicely, either. They were hitting like right about in the middle, which is not enough to make it in the WAC, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Tim O'Connor will still have a good season, though. 70 tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 interceptions. I'm going to be really intrigued by this young man and how he improves throughout his college career, because he's already a 72 overall. So I'm sure he's going to, test some people out there in the future. And finally, the final finalist for the Jim Forpay Award is senior corner Jason Williams. Definitely some seniors that are dominating at least this particular award list, as Jason Williams ends up with 28 tackles, 6 interceptions. That's more interceptions than Tim O'Connor and Rodney Cook combined. That's absolutely insane to me that he doesn't end up winning the award. I mean, if you have more interceptions than the other 2 finalists combined, I figured that would be enough to win the Jim Forpay. But the award voters disagreed, and I'm not gonna go through the mod and all that good stuff to change the award winners just because I disagree with something. But man, Jason Williams, I'm sure, feels really robbed because he had an absolutely incredible season, almost taking North Carolina A&T to the playoffs. By the way, they were one of the last few teams that were on the outside looking in. Now we quickly move on to the Luke Groza Award, and that does go to the best kicker in college football. Jonathan Walton, as a true freshman, does end up winning it. He was 25 for 29 on field goal attempts with a long of 53, plus was pretty good on his extra points. Plus, being a true freshman, that is really impressive because he beats out 2 senior redshirts that were also on this finalist list. Lee Brown, a senior from Tennessee State, just didn't kick as many field goals or, extra points. And then same could be said for Joseph Sline, representing for Eastern Illinois, the 6 foot, 191 pound product. also ends up finishing behind the true freshman and finishes in 3rd place overall. Now, as for the best punter, that goes to actually arguably one of the best overall players in this series still, John Paul Handy. He's a senior from Eastern Carolina, and he actually doubles his punt yardage from last year. He ends up with 2,600 punt yards. He averages 50 yards a punt. That is absolutely incredible. 95 overall. Really the Matt Ariza of the FCS, and I'm sure he will have a opportunity to compete for an NFL spot early on in his career. The other 2 punters, James Dyke is a junior redshirt from San Diego State. He does end up finishing with a punt average of 42.8, so definitely not bad by any stretch of the imagination. And then in 3rd place is senior punter Cedric Robinson from UNLV. He also finishes with a similar punt average on the year, but yeah, no surprise that John Paul Handy wins the best punter award. As for the best return man in all of college football, we have the senior wide receiver from New Hampshire that ends up winning the award, as it goes to Bobby Young. Now, Bobby Young was a very dangerous weapon for the Wildcats. He was actually considered a Heisman finalist for a good portion of the season. He ends up with 22 receiving touchdowns, but obviously that's not why we're talking about him. We're talking about him because he was a great kick returner as well. He averaged 24 yards a kick return, and then we also see him get 7 punt return touchdowns. Just an absolutely dynamic weapon for Bobby Young. Unfortunately, that's not enough for New Hampshire to get very far in the FCS playoffs. As for the other 2 people that were on this list, we saw Marty Suber make an impact right away for the Akron Zips, as a true freshman does end up with 2,100 all-purpose yards and 14 total touchdowns on the season. Plus, we got Kenny Brown, the sophomore redshirt from UMass, as he's going to be a first-team all-independent player, and for good reason. 1,800 all-purpose yards, 7 total touchdowns. A very good player that, you know, we'll see what ends up happening to him when it's all said and done, but Kenny Brown, love what this kid could do for your football team. And finally, the best, or at least the coach of the year, that is going to go to the head coach of Kent State. And while he doesn't have an actual name, he does finish 15-1, and he does have that 2nd national championship under his belt. Dare I say it, he might be the new Nick Saban of the FCS. I'm sure that will piss a lot of non-Alabama fans off, but I mean, when you win 2 national championships in a row, people are certainly going to take notice. The other 2 finalists was the Eastern Carolina coach, who did also partake in the national championship but lost, and then the UL Monroe coach, who I actually thought should have gotten it, just because this is a guy took a little known team and took them all the way to the semifinals. So I thought his coaching job, he had the best coaching job, but not enough to get the Coach of the Year award. But now that we've seen all of the award winners here in season number 2, let's go ahead and take a look at the full All-American list, not only for all the first team guys, but all the second team guys as well, and guys that you should recognize from the award finalist list. Guys like Travis Wilkerson, the junior quarterback from Alcorn State. He is wearing that number 1 and is considered a first team All-American here in season number 2. Same thing could be said for Josh Harris. He was actually started as the backup, I believe, behind Barrett Haston, but Josh Harris, he really stepped up in a massive way, and he won the Walker Award because of it. He also gets first team honors. Same could be said for Ivan Jenkins. He was a bright spot that we saw play extremely well, even though the team around him didn't necessarily live up to those expectations. Meanwhile, at the wide receiver position, we saw Bobby Young, the senior wideout, best return man in college football. He gets those first team honors. Same thing with John Reed, who won the best wide receiver in college football. He wins that award for the 2nd year in a row. We got some guys that weren't on any award list that do get those first team All-American honors. Victor Richardson, for example, is a huge example of that. The senior wide receiver from South Carolina State. He ends up with almost 1,800 all-purpose yards and 9 total touchdowns as well. He was a dynamic weapon for the Bulldogs, standing at 5'10" and 180 pounds. Even though he didn't necessarily have the size, he definitely had a bark in the dog, and he definitely has a dog in him. We also see Aiden Rose, one of your guys' custom prospects, gets on the All-American list. He is a first-team All-American with those 500 yards and 6 touchdowns on the year. But then we move on to the offensive line. And on the offensive line, we see Mark Moore, best offensive lineman in the country. He gets first-team honors. Josh Brigham, a junior from New Hampshire, he does end up winning first-team honors, 78 pancakes, and a few sacks to his name, but overall a great year for the junior offensive lineman, protecting the blind side of Carlos Montoya. Meanwhile, at one of the guard positions, we have Gary Ross, a sophomore redshirt. He ends up with 97 pancakes and 3 sacks. I thought he should have gotten that best offensive lineman award, but it didn't happen that way. Still a phenomenal year from this young man, as the other 2 offensive lineman spots go to freshman Marcus Johnson of the Bison and Jeremy King, who ends up winning not only first-team All-American honors, but also the Remington Award that goes to the best center in all of college football. But now we move on to the defensive side of the ball for the first-team All-Americans. We got Stephen Green, who we saw, get that defensive touchdown in the quarterfinals. He ends up with a first-team All-American honors alongside Marquise Thomas, who did also win the Lombardi Trophy. But then we move on to the interior line. We move on to Fred Thomas, a junior from New Hampshire, who did really good work up the middle. 41 tackles, 23 of which were TFL, 11 sacks. So he ends up double-digit sacks, even though many times he was facing a double team, and topping that all off with a forced fumble. So a great year for Fred Thomas. Aaron Turner also gets the other defensive tackle spot. He ends up 11 sacks as well. Moving up to the linebacker core, no surprises here as Ryan Bush continues to rack up those awards, winning freshman All-American and first-team All-American as well. Generational player, man. That's all that really needs to be said about this kid. I would not be shocked if, despite the fact that he starts at the FCS level, either he transfers upward to the FBS or he leaves early and becomes, a rarity in FCS college football, being a first-round pick, and we usually don't see that unless it happens to be for the quarterback position. Now, another surprise here at the All-American position for outside linebacker is Adam Hurd, the freshman out of Denver. So the Pioneers get a first-team All-American. Very warranted. 99 tackles, 12 TFLs, 4 sacks, 3 interceptions, and a couple of forced fumbles. Talk about a guy that was absolutely all over the field. Same could be said for Daniel Martin, who was on some award lists, and despite being 5'8", he certainly made a difference for that Eastern Illinois defense. Moving on to the defensive backs, we got Tim O'Connor, who nearly won the Jim Forte Award. Very close, but no cigar. 70 tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 interceptions. Leon Rushing does also get it as well. Did a little bit of everything for that Bison defense. Ends up with 36 tackles, 5 TFLs, couple of sacks. Also has multiple interceptions, forced fumbles, and touchdowns to all go with it as well. Absolutely insane stuff. Meanwhile, for the safeties, we see Ronnie Wilcox also get All-American honors for North Dakota State. A lot of All-Americans for a team that got bounced early in the FCS tournament once again. Shots fired, I know, but Ronnie Wilcox, well-deserved, 6 interceptions. Someone that should have won the Jim Forte Award, in my opinion. As for the actual Jim Forte Award winner, Rodney Cook, he is also a first-team All-American. Rounding out the group, we have the kickers and punters for the first team. We got Brent Thomas, freshman kicker for Kent State. He ends up winning first-team honors. As for the best punter, or at least the first-team punter, that goes to John Paul Handy, who does, of course, win that best punter award, and that is well warranted. As for the second team All-American group, and some interesting developments here, Andy Mosley does get the second team All-American. Maxwell Award winner does get it over Kenny Raymer, despite not having as many stats. So, something interesting to really think about here, as both James Madison and San Diego State, they were both eliminated in the second round of the FCS playoffs this year. So, just a little interesting tidbit as we move on for the rest of the season. Roderick Murray, meanwhile, a true freshman from Texas Southern, he ends up winning first team All-American, or second team All-American honors, I should say. He ends up with 17 total touchdowns and then close to 2,000 yards of total offense. He was the offense for Texas Southern, and he was no joke either. Dude was absolutely special in his first year of college football. Same could be said for Thomas Marshall, who is a junior at Idaho. He also ends up with close to 2,000 yards, but he also found the end zone more often, 25 touchdowns, and ends up with second team honors. As for the wide receiver core, the Heisman Trophy winner, Michael Horn, the senior out of Alcorn State, second team All-American. He was not on any finalist list for any awards other than the Heisman. Little bit of a surprise, but hey, it is what it is though. He does get second team All-American honors. And he's with another Heisman finalist as well, Brian Pruitt, who ends up with 15 touchdowns on the season. A great year for the sophomore wide receiver. He gets those second team honors, and they're well warranted. Along with freshman wideout Marty Suber, representing the University of Akron, 2,100 all-purpose yards, 14 total touchdowns, a dynamic weapon from day one for Akron, even though the Zips do not make the FCS playoffs here in year number 2. As for the tight end position, the best tight end in all of college football, according to the game, Mike Crum does not get those first team honors. That of course, went to Aiden Rose, one of your guys' custom prospects. The Crum bucket does end up with second team All-American honors, close to 500 yards receiving, and 7 touchdowns to his name. So a solid year for Mike Crum, and he's only a freshman and is bound to get better as his collegiate career goes on. As for the second team All-American group on the offensive line, we have Michael Copeland, the junior out of Texas Southern, who ends up with 77 tackles, pancakes, and 3 sacks allowed. Cedric Hart, the true freshman from Georgia Southern, he only allowed 1 sack while also garnering 49 pancakes of his own. Also among the true freshmen, though, is Warren Ingram, true freshman, 29 pancakes, 3 sacks allowed to go with it as well. So a very good center in his true freshman campaign, along with another Bison offensive lineman. The Bison had 5 All-Americans, either first or second team. He's the only second team guy, but Brian Britt, 69 pancakes, 2 sacks allowed to go with it, also having a very good year. And then rounding out the group for the offensive line is Joe Rice, 77 pancakes, 7 sacks, and doing all that as a true freshman playing for the New Hampshire Wildcats. As for the defensive side of the football, we start with Brandon Wiggins, the true freshman out of Southern Missouri State. He ends up with a very good year in his first year of college football. 73 tackles, 29 TFL, 12 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. He would have been he was very close to first team honors, but the voters did decide on having him be a second team All-American. Same goes with Nate Fine, and he was more than just fine in his junior campaign. Representing the Black Bears of Maine, he ends up with 62 tackles, 17 TFLs, 11 sacks, interception, which I still don't know how a defensive lineman got an interception. I'm pretty sure we saw that in gameplay as well. 4 forced fumbles, and of course a defensive touchdown as well. Very good year, as Maine was very close to making it to the FCS playoffs in year number 2. If they won their conference championship game, they would have been in, but you know, close only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and nuclear missiles. Moving into the interior defensive line, we have Jeff Waters of Alcorn State gets second team honors. 50 tackles, but half of them were TFLs. 10 sacks, so a double-digit sack year in his first collegiate campaign, and also forcing a forced fumble, so very deserving of the second team honors, as is the senior redshirt out of Eastern Kentucky, Roman Owens, only sitting at 5'11", so a little bit undersized for a defensive lineman, but he does end up with 51 tackles, 15 TFLs, 6 sacks, and then also forced 6 fumbles over the course of the year. He knew how to get that ball loose. Next up, we have the linebacker core for the second team All-Americans, as we got Mike Terry, who we saw on award finalist list. He did get those second team honors. But we got Daryl Falcon here as well, the true freshman out of Alabama State. He helped elevate that Alabama State defense considerably. They really have progressed since giving up 100 plus points against New Mexico State. That is still the record in this series as of the recording of this video. Maybe somewhere down the line it ends up being broken. Who knows? But Daryl Falk ends up with 77 tackles, 24 TFLs, double-digit sacks as well as multiple interceptions and forced fumbles. So an immediate impact player for the Alabama State Hornets. Same could be said for true freshman Ryan Gilmore, the freshman out of Utah State. He also had a very good year, 8 sacks, 4 forced fumbles and an interception, plus 19 TFLs. Not too shabby if I say so myself. For the remaining skill position players for the All-American list, we have Jason Williams, the senior for North Carolina A&T. A guy who I thought could very well win the Jim Forpay Award, to be honest, but here he is on that second team All-American list, so not a lot of respect on his name, but it is what it is. Barrett Moore, a guy who, really stepped up and played some great football, particularly in the playoffs. He actually had 9 total touchdowns as well, and 1,700 yards, not to mention what he was able to do on the defensive side of the football. He had 7 interceptions this year. This guy was special over the course of the year, and he's an 87 overall. Maybe someone that could very well make his way to the NFL. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. I can definitely see him as really a day free pick kind of guy. He definitely at least deserves a look of some sorts. For the free safety position, though, we got Sidney Flowers, the senior red shirt out of Utah State. So, 2 defensive players from the Aggies that did make it on this All-American list. 36 tackles, but only a 4 TFLs, so a little bit on the low side, but gotta keep in mind he is a safety. He only had the 1 sack, but 2 interceptions and 3 TFLs, or forced fumbles. He was a ball hawk back there for Utah State this season. And then, of course, the final All-American in terms of the skill position, guys, is Keon Trina, the true freshman from New Hampshire. He ends up with 44 tackles, 4 TFLs, multiple sacks, interceptions, forced fumbles, and, of course, multiple touchdowns to go with it. Keon Trina, a player to watch as his collegiate career progresses. That being said, the Groza winner also ends up being second-team All-American, so a little bit of a surprise there, but, it is what it is. And James Dykes wins the second-team All-American honors for the punter position. Now, before I jump into one of the most important parts of the offseason as recruiting, to see how these various teams recruited, as well as, where individual players go, there's a few teams in the NCAA that did end up on the naughty list. One of those teams ends up being Weber State. They do end up facing NCAA sanctions, and what's going to happen to them is they are going to have 10 less scholarships for the next 2 seasons. So that's going to actually apply to this year, here in year number 2, and that will also apply to year number 3 as well in terms of having those scholarship sanctions. Another team that did end up facing some sanctions is Texas Southern. They too will have 10 less scholarships for the next couple of seasons. So instead of the Tigers carrying 25 scholarships, as many FCS schools will, they are only going to have 15 scholarships to work with for the next couple of off seasons, including this one. So Texas Southern, they are going to have to really be picky in terms of who they bring in, because they cannot afford to have a bust on their roster as a true freshman, as these other schools can, because they just don't have as many bullets. Also going for the same thing is Western Carolina. The NCAA, they were a little suspicious about Western Carolina being able to garner a top 5 class, even though they really weren't that relevant in season number 1. So the NCAA did some investigating, and there was some improper stuff with the NIL, stuff that's going on that's, still relatively new to college football. So Western Carolina, they are going to be punished as well. They are also going to have 10 less scholarships for the next couple of years. And that's a really big deal that these schools have NCAA sanctions. And let me explain further. It's not just that they are going to have less scholarships to work with in this offseason and the next offseason. There's also going to be more punishments with that in terms of this being an FCS dynasty. So, let me explain. So, for any school that currently has NCAA sanctions, unless it's a nationally televised game, we will not be seeing these particular teams in gameplay. So, Western Carolina, Texas Southern, and Weber State, we will not see them unless they are a part of nationally televised games. Plus, because they also have those sanctions, they will also be disallowed from participating in the FCS playoffs. So, even if they end up winning their conference, they will not have the opportunity to play for an FCS national championship. And that's a really big deal, to automatically not be allowed to play for a national title for the next 2 years. Western Carolina in particular, I thought they had a really good shot this year. They came in with a C+ offense, C- defense. You know, they were up there as a sleeper, but their starting quarterback got hurt, and at least for the next couple of years, that window is going to be closed. They can still compete for conference championships, but that would be where their season ends. So for Western Carolina, Texas Southern, and Weber State, those three schools, we will not see them in the FCS playoffs until at least year number 4, if their programs are good enough to make the cut. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover before we got into the offseason, we got a coaching change among your guys' custom coaches. Coach Faith, he was frustrated by the lack of institutional care for the football program at South Dakota State. So after 2 years there and an 8-14 overall record, he decides to resign from the head coaching position from South Dakota State, and he is now down here at Florida A&M. And Florida A&M, they got some work to do. They finished 2-9. They're going to definitely need a quarterback. They need some pieces, but you know, Florida A&M, they're going to put more resources as well into their football program. We'll see if Justin Faith is the right guy that will lead Florida A&M to actual relevancy here in season number 3. As for and I know like another thing that I want to address real quick as well in terms of the custom coaches. I know this was something that I was asked in the year 1 offseason and why I can't add new coaches. So the strange thing is, I go and try to add a new coach. So I'll go and, you know, click create coach, and I'll do all the stuff, you know, I try to create the guy and whatnot, make sure everything looks good. I click continue and nothing happens, right? So that's why I have been able to create new custom coaches, and that might be the case. If I can figure some things out in the mod, I will definitely make that happen. But in terms of why I haven't added new custom coaches, that's why. So I just wanted to put that out there as well before we go check in on the players that are going to be leaving us here in the offseason between graduation and also those that want to give their shot to the NFL and other professional leagues that American and Canadian football has to offer. But now we get to what is always the most difficult part of any offseason, seeing players graduate, and that's what makes sustaining success at the college football level difficult at times. You're losing 20 to 25% of your roster either to graduation or to the transfer portal or even to the professional draft, whether that be for the NFL, CFL, or one of these spring leagues like the XFL and USFL. So, who are some of the notable guys that are going to move on to greener pastures? We start with the highest overall rated person that is graduating, John Paul Handy. He was considered the best punter in America, the punter from Eastern Carolina. He looks like he is going to look to be the Matt Ariza of the FCS. Hopefully he gets that opportunity to be just that. As for Ivan Jenkins, he is actually going to forgo his senior year and go for the NFL draft, and well warranted. You want to talk about a guy with 20 total touchdowns over the course of the year? He was certainly that guy, and he was a very talented player in the process for the North Texas Mean Green. As for the Lombardi Award winner, he is a senior redshirt, so he will also go ahead and graduate from the University of Montana. We'll see what happens to Marquis Thomas. He does have some NFL buzz going into the NFL draft process, We'll see if he actually gets selected, or would he be one of those undrafted free agents, or does he go to a smaller league? We'll have to wait and see what happens to Marquis Thomas. As for Thomas Marshall, he will actually go ahead and forego his senior year as the first team all-conference running back out of the WAC conference. He's going to test those NFL waters as he ends up with 25 touchdowns on the year. We'll see if that's enough to get the scouts' attention as he puts his name in the hat for the NFL draft. Now, a guy that we didn't see a ton of, but still had a pretty solid year, was Reggie Johnson, the junior running back out of Tulane. He did have nearly 1,000 yards rushing, but did find the end zone 7 times, as well as have a few catches out of the backfield. The junior running back for the Green Wave, he is also going to forgo his senior year in order to try to go for that NFL dream. As for Gary Jackson, he's a junior redshirt out of Chattanooga, and the outside linebacker, he's going to try to capitalize on what was a great season for him within that new look Big 12 conference. He is also going to forgo his senior year and put his name in the hat for the NFL draft. The first team all-conference linebacker looking to cash in on that check. One thing that we will also know for year number 3 is that we will have a new Heisman Trophy winner. There will not be a repeat, as Michael Horn was the year 2 Heisman Trophy winner, but as a senior, he is going to graduate. We'll see what happens to his NFL prospects, but being the FCS Player of the Year, I'm sure that will garner at least some level of attention, I would imagine. As for Michael Copeland, he is a true junior at the University of Texas Southern and had a really great year. 77 pancakes, 3 sacks. I believe he was on some award finalist lists. But that being said, he will also forego his senior campaign with the Tigers, as he, saw those NCAA sanctions, knew that they were going to compete for a FCS national championship for his senior year, unfortunately. So Michael Copeland, he is going to leave the program early and also try to make his way into the NFL. Best of luck to Michael Copeland, a first-team all-conference offensive lineman. As for Fred Thomas, the true junior from New Hampshire, he was a first-team All-American at the FCS level, and realizing that Fred Thomas might have what it takes to play professional football, he will also be forgoing his senior year. Fred Thomas, good year, 11 sacks, 23 TFLs. He looks to achieve his NFL dream. Also looking to achieve the NFL dream is Andy Mosley, the junior redshirt out of San Diego State, also winning both the Maxwell Award and the Best Quarterback Award as well to go with it. Andy Mosley, he is also going to forgo his senior year and going to look for the opportunity to play in the NFL come this fall. And one thing that I am noticing is that there's quite a few people that are forgoing their senior year, surprisingly, and Travis Atkins is one of them. First team all-conference, and while being in a run-heavy offense, he still balled out. 73 catches, 1,000 yards, 14 total touchdowns to his name. The first team all-conference wide receiver from Nicole State will forgo his senior year to chase that professional football dream. Speaking of chasing that professional football dream, we also have Randy Price, the junior running back out of Florida Atlantic, who, his team was eliminated in the first round, but he did also help in terms of the Owls making their first FCS playoff appearance. He ends up with around 1,300 yards of total offense and 9 touchdowns to his name as well. And being a second team all-conference at the Sun Belt, he looks to go to the NFL. Also looking to go to the NFL is B.J. Thompson, the junior running back from San Diego State. After putting up some decent numbers, they're not as eye-popping as many of the other juniors and junior redshirts that we have seen graduate and try to leave early for the professional draft. But, he has some really good skills. I think it would be better for him to stay for his senior year, but B.J. Thompson doesn't see it that way, as he was a first-team all-conference in the Mountain West. So he will forgo his senior year and chase that pro football dream. Same can be said for junior offensive lineman Anthony Robinson, part of a first-team all-conference selection. 76 pancakes, 4 sacks allowed as well. Anthony Robinson has the tools to make it to the NFL. We'll see if a team does end up getting him a shot at later, either as a day 3 pick or as an undrafted free agent. He has the tools, but will he be given an opportunity to develop? Speaking of that development, though, Brandon Fuller also could possibly be a boom or bust prospect in the NFL. A second team all-conference. He ends up with 12 touchdowns, 67 catches, and 850 yards to go with it. Feels like that is good enough for him to go ahead and forgo his senior year of eligibility down at the FCS level. Also looking to forgo their eligibility is Brandon Phillips, not to be confused with the former great Reds shortstop Brandon Phillips. He ends up with 1,000 yards receiving and 13 touchdowns. That was good for second team all-conference USA. He will therefore forgo his senior year and test the ranks of professional football. Also looking to test the ranks of professional football is Josh Brigham, the junior left tackle from the University of New Hampshire. He had a brilliant season, and that's why he was a first-team All-American. And Josh Brigham, feeling himself after that designation, is going to declare for the professional draft, best of luck to his NFL prospects. He's got the tools at 6'8" and 340 pounds. We'll see if NFL teams draft him thanks to those physical traits. Also looking to get drafted is Wallace Gates, junior redshirt out of Northwestern State. He was a very dynamic athlete, and I was actually surprised that he didn't end up being an All-American, but he does get first-team All-SEC honors. He has 2,500 all-purpose yards, 19 touchdowns. Maybe could have waited until his senior year, but with the stats that he put up, I mean, it might be too easy for him at this point. So, best of luck to Wallace Gates as he tries to make an NFL dream happen. Also attempting to make an NFL dream happen is Adam Maxwell, the junior redshirt out of Kent State. This defensive tackle was a force up the middle with close to 20 TFLs and 5 sacks, which is really solid for an interior defensive lineman. He was a first-team all-conference in that MAC conference, which had some serious competition here in year number 2, and will forgo his senior year because of that, looking to make it to the NFL. Rodney Cook is also going to graduate as well, as he is leaving on top, winning that Jim Forte Award. Rodney Cook, an incredibly smart person. I'm going to be curious to see what he ends up doing with his future, but he has something in the trophy case to always remember his college days. Also graduating with some hardware is Josh Harris, as this was his final year of eligibility. Josh Harris started as a backup, remember that, you guys, but because of the injuries to Barrett Haston, he really got a chance to prove himself, and boy, did he do just that. 23 touchdowns on the year, 1,600 total yards, and helping Eastern Carolina make it all the way to the national championship. A pretty fruitful college career, if you ask me. But we also have some notable transfers here as well. Biggest transfer on this list, though, is Russell Evans. He did not get much playing time in his true freshman campaign, and he's actually going to transfer within the state of California. He is going to San Jose State, and this is a big loss for the Aztecs, as Russell Evans, he was looking to have a big role in this offense here in season number 3, but he just didn't feel at home at San Diego State, so he is going to go up to San Jose State and play the rest of his college football there. He did not get the waiver, though, so he will have to sit out for year number 3. As for another person that is looking to join the professional ranks is James Williams, a first-team all-conference nod. He had a good year, 41 pancakes and just 6 sacks allowed. Also bringing those physical traits at 6'8" and 340 pounds. So he is a very large human being, that's for sure. So he's going to try to use that frame to craft an NFL career. Also looking to craft an NFL career is Mitch Washington at 6'6", 200 pounds. He will need to add a little bit more weight to his frame, but a first-team all-conference nominee. He had a brilliant season in year number 2, 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. And that'll be enough for him to feel like he can go ahead and forgo his senior year to test the NFL waters. Also testing the NFL waters in addition is Rob Burks, the junior redshirt out of SMU. A brilliant season for him as well. 1,200 yards, 16 touchdowns, and a second-team all-conference nominee. he definitely broke some big runs over the course of the season and will forgo his senior year because of those gaudy numbers. But we do have more big-time transfers as Joel Ross, one of the backup tight ends for James Madison, he actually is going to go ahead and transfer out of James Madison, and he's going to join Jackson State. So that is a huge pickup for that Jackson State squad, as they were looking for some big-time players. Joel Ross, he will be a true sophomore, but will have to redshirt because his waiver did not get approved for year number 3. However, that being said, we will say goodbye to Bobby Young as well. He had 2,600 all-purpose yards and 30 total touchdowns. That was enough for him to be considered the best return man in college football. Bobby Young, while his NFL dreams might not happen for him, he is going to finish his college career on an extremely high note. But we also have more big-time transfers as Jimmy Spicer is going to leave. He is going to transfer also out of that James Madison program. He only had a few catches for 62 yards. He's going to go to the Big Ten to play for the Sanford Bulldogs and get more playing time over there. Big deal for Sanford as they get a big tight end for year number 4, although he will have to sit out for year 3 and take a redshirt year. On the opposite end of that is Derek Wright, the junior running back out of Mid-Tennessee State. He helped his team pull the upset against North Dakota State early in the year, but they flamed out after that. Still a good year for him, though, as he ends up with 1,000 total yards and 11 touchdowns. He will forgo his senior year. Also looking to forgo his senior year is Ryan Perkins, who was a first-team All-Big Ten. I thought was somebody that could have also gone ahead and gotten All-American honors, but the voters didn't see it that way. Still ends up with 2,400 all-purpose yards and 20 touchdowns. Where Eastern Kentucky is sorely going to miss him, as he was the centerpiece of the Colonel's offense. But we just found out the results of this past NFL draft, and some more of our guys that were in that FCS series, they do get an opportunity to chase that NFL dream, as we end up seeing, looks like about a dozen guys going to the NFL level from the FCS. So definitely more improved from last year. Starting with the highest FCS player drafted, Michael Douglas out of Northern Arizona. His offense was a lot of fun to watch out for, and he was selected with the 5th overall selection in the 3rd round. He was a 3rd round pick. I want to point out, not a top 5 pick by any means. They do have Mac Jones there on the New England Patriots, but he will start off as a backup in his rookie campaign. Now, I know that this is Madden 22 in terms of, this will Madden franchise, you'll snippet, but we do also have some things planned for Madden 23, so definitely stay tuned for that. As for the 8th selection in the 3rd round of the NFL draft, the New York Jets selected Brock Lawrence, the dynamic running back out of Tennessee State. Now, 5'10", 175 pounds does mean that he is going to be a little bit buried on the depth chart, but he's going to end up being that 4th or 5th running back. Probably someone that's going to work on special teams for the time being. But that being said, congratulations to Brock Lawrence on earning his NFL opportunity. As for his college teammate, Michael Berry, he is going to go in the 4th round of the NFL draft, selected by the Bears, and he will be backing up Justin Fields. The 23-year-old out of Tennessee State had a solid year and a little bit more mobile than what people would have thought, and he's going to get his opportunity being the backup quarterback for the Bears. Moving on to the 5th round of the NFL draft, we have Idaho tackle Mike Johnson that ends up getting selected by the Miami Dolphins here. Really good size, 6'6", 296 pounds. He does come in as a 23-year-old rookie, so I don't know how much upside this guy has, but he is going to start out as a 3rd-string guy at that left tackle position for the Miami Dolphins. Keeping ourselves in the 5th round, though, we have Darrell Walker, the quarterback from Texas State, and while we didn't really see him in year number 2, he was a very dynamic athlete in year number 1, carries a really strong arm. He is actually going to be in a reserve role as well, obviously, because he is down in that 57 overall, but he does get an opportunity to play in the NFL, or at least be on an NFL roster as a day free selection. Keeping ourselves in the AFC South, though, we have Jazz Jackson, the quarterback from Southeast Louisiana University. He ends up being selected in the 6th round of the NFL draft by the Indianapolis Colts. And Jazz Jackson, definitely has some improvising skills. I wasn't really impressed with him necessarily in terms of how he performed in games, but he definitely has some traits that the Colts like as a backup quarterback, and he is going to be in a battle for that 3rd string position in his rookie campaign. Don't really expect him to see the field for a long time, though. Now, the New York Jets did not just take one FCS player from this series, they actually end up taking 2 FCS players from this series, as Andrew Coley out of Murray State is also going to be selected. More of a possession type of tight end. He's not going to really threaten you upfield, and definitely needs to work on his blocking, but he is actually going to be one of just 2 tight ends that are on the roster for the New York Jets. So I expect Andrew Coley to get a decent amount of playing time, despite the fact that he is a 6th round rookie in the National Football League. But now we go into the final round of the NFL draft, round number 7, and we see quite a few guys from the collegiate levels out of our FCS series get drafted by NFL teams. Starting with the Los Angeles Rams, who do have a 7th round pick. Yeah, I know, the Rams actually have picks in Madden 22, but Andre Jefferson, he's from Hofstra University. We didn't see him just because first 2 years Hofstra has not done too much as of yet, but really solid football player. He can be quite elusive for the fact that he is a little bit taller for a running back at 6'2", but 7th round pick. Despite all of that, he is going to be fighting for a roster spot here in this preseason, as he's going to have some work to do before, if to have any chance really, of making the final cut. Someone who may not have as much of an issue, though, in terms of making it onto an NFL roster is Glenn Williams, the quarterback from Southeast Missouri State. The Panthers really like how he handled himself overall in the FCS playoff matchup against Eastern Michigan in the 1st round. So they were debating between him and Kenny Raymer, and the Carolina Panthers, they like what he did in the FCS playoffs more than what Kenny Raymer did, and Eastern Michigan considered a better team than Central Michigan. That was who James Madison went up against, but he ends up being the 7th round selection for the Carolina Panthers, and looks like he currently has the inside track for the 3rd round, for being not the 3rd round, but being a 3rd string quarterback in his rookie year. Also getting selected in the 7th round is Blaine Coleman. Blaine Coleman being a defensive back out of Murray State as well. So the Racers, even though they finished below 500, they do also end up with multiple players going on to the NFL level. Despite the fact that Blaine Coleman is buried on the depth chart as of right now, and he is a 7th rounder, he does have that hidden dev trait, which we're going to go ahead and see what that is real quick, just out of sheer curiosity, if Madden 22 will allow me to do just that, as it looks like his prayer traits, he has a star development trait. So that's a really cool thing to see. Someone that could potentially be a long-term starter for the Denver Broncos if he does get enough reps in game action, whether that be in the regular season or in the postseason. Keeping it in the 7th round and going across the beautiful city of Los Angeles, we have the LA Chargers, who did end up selecting Thomas Marshall in the 7th round of the NFL draft. Thomas Marshall, more of a power back, likes to run you over, but does have some elusiveness as well, and that is his decent scheme fit for the Chargers, actually, with what they run alongside like Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler. That's the type of guys that they like to go for. But Thomas Marshall, he's going to be buried on the depth chart early, but as of right now, he sits on an NFL roster. And the last FCS player that was selected from the series was Melvin Correll, a middle linebacker from Illinois State. Now, when he was the last player selected, he was literally almost the last player selected, actually. He was the 4th to last pick in the NFL draft. But hey, man, you get drafted, you make it onto the team, you know, you're in, right? Like that, it's just how the cookie ends up crumbling sometimes. But that being said, Melvin Correll, congratulations to him of representing for Illinois State, part of a team that, you know, Illinois State was not very good whatsoever. They've definitely been a raw dog the first couple of years, but a little bit of a bright spot for that Redbirds program as they do end up sending somebody to the NFL. But now we move on to what I think is the most exciting part about the offseason. The recruiting, man. Who is going to be the new future faces of college football? And it's been fun, man. We'll go ahead and see the number 1 players at each position, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the top recruiting classes that are bestowed, you know, throughout the country, as well as talk about more specifically, you know, how you guys can get a little bit more involved in this series. So we'll jump right into it. Number 1 athlete being Ricky Maxwell. And listen, number 1 athlete, what's surprising to me is that there's no 5-star athletes. I thought that was extremely interesting, and there was hardly any 4-star athletes to go around. But Ricky Maxwell is one of them. He is committed to go to San Diego State, and I wanted to point him out specifically because, listen, you gotta see his stats, right? 6'10", 321 pounds. Like, my brother in Christ, you are playing the wrong sport. You know, I would not be shocked if he went to go play basketball on top of his football endeavors. But number 1 athlete in the country here in this recruiting class, he is going to sign with the Aztecs. But the number 2 athlete is a huge pickup for Northwestern State, though. Robbie Stooks is going to play his college football at Northwestern State. He is the number 2 athlete in this recruiting class, hailing from Hillsboro, Texas. Standing at 6 foot, 206 pounds. You want to talk about a guy that has elite field awareness. He's got very nice hands as well, a 4.4 free as well. I expect that he would, move very well over to that wide receiver position, or potentially playing as a defensive back at the next level. But now we move on to the actual positions that we have on the field, and we start with the number 1 quarterback in this recruiting class, and that is Andrew Jones, who ends up winning the Elite 11 camp, hailing from Las Mesa, California, and has some really great size as well. 6'5", 208 pounds, so he could stand to put a little bit more weight, get into those 210s, maybe 220 at the most. But Andrew Jones brings some elite talent, and Weber State is going to be very fortunate to garner his services, as he has an absolute rocket for an arm. A+ arm strength. He's got very strong accuracy as well. Not the quickest though. He only runs a 5.0 in terms of his 40-yard dash. So that is really interesting to see. So he's not a dual threat quarterback, but from the pocket, he is going to be able to slice you up and dice you down. And I'm really excited to follow Andrew Jones' college career over at Weber State. As for the number 1 running back in this year's recruiting class, he comes from Safety Harbor, Florida. It's James Snyder. And James Snyder sitting at 5'11", 200 pounds. And the Tennessee Tech Golden Eagles are going to garner his services, despite the fact that James Snyder was not, Tennessee Tech did not have the best season this year. Has absolutely elite speed. 4.24 40-yard dash. He's got a solid vertical jump as well, 36 inches. Very good hands out of the backfield as well. Really a complete back that you look for. And he's extremely strong as well. 380 pounds on the bench press, 680 on the squat. He will run you over as well if he needs to, but he's going to lean a little bit more on that speed. But James Snyder, definitely someone to watch out for in terms of being an impact player day number 1 for Tennessee Tech. And we'll see if that is enough to take the Golden Eagles over the top in terms of getting back to the FCS playoffs for the very first time since year number 1. Now, I can't talk about the backfield without talking about the fullbacks, as those fullbacks deserve love as well. And Interesting thing about NCAA 06, I love the Dynasty, but, sometimes you do end up seeing 4 or 5-star players at certain positions that you typically would not see in today's college football rankings, but that was just because it was a different time. Like, we'll see 4-star fullbacks, 4-star punters, kickers, etc., etc. But Derek Parker, hailing from Union City, California, he is the #1 fullback in this recruiting class, and he is going to sign with the Bison of North Dakota State, which I'm really not that surprised about because North Dakota State, they do really like to use their fullbacks. So I really like this signing for the Bison. Does have decent field awareness and honestly pretty fast for a fullback. A 4.48 in the 40-yard dash. That's really extremely good stuff there. And he also has excellent hands out of the backfield as well. So Derek Parker could be a dynamic weapon for some of those option plays that North Dakota State runs. Moving on over to the wide receiver group, and something that I was a little bit surprised about is that there was only one 5-star wide receiver in this entire recruiting class, and that was Stanley Sullivan from Lakewood, Ohio. He does end up signing with the East Carolina Pirates and was somebody that, was a very he's going to go to a very dynamic team, a team that was very close to winning a national championship, but Eastern Carolina are going to lose a few key seniors, and he might have a role for day one. That being said, though, the highest player to sign for an actual FCS school, though, was actually the #3 wide receiver in this recruiting class, 4-star Jonathan Brown, hailing from Irwin, North Carolina. They're able to keep this guy in state, and he's going to sign with the Elon Phoenix, who, did have that big-time upset. I believe it was against Temple at the beginning of the season, but then, they really couldn't do anything for the rest of the season. Still a very good signing for Elon as he ends up bringing really nice all-around skill sets. I'm actually surprised that he doesn't have that 5-star rating because he has everything that you're looking for. 4.3, A- field awareness. He's got a 40-inch vertical to go with it as well, and his hands are absolutely spectacular as well to go with it. So you want to talk about a guy that could do anything and everything. Jonathan Brown is certainly that guy. So I think Jonathan Brown, he is going to exceed his expectations as a 4-star prospect. But now we jump into a 5-star that South Dakota State was able to get. Now this is their second #1 player that they get at a certain position, although this time it is not at the quarterback position, but is actually at the tight end position. John White from Cerritos, California, and he's got phenomenal size, 6'8", 247 pounds. If for some reason tight end simply doesn't work out, he could always move over to offensive line because of that 6'8" size. You could definitely do something with that, but he will become an elite red zone threat. 4.5, 40-yard dash, so he's not going to be the easiest person to keep up with either. Great vertical jump as well, phenomenal hands, and a really strong player. Is a huge pickup for the Jackrabbits, as Keon Ragsdale, the custom player at quarterback for South Dakota State, he gets a red zone target to play with here in year #3. Up next, we move over to the offensive line, and for the tackle position, there was one 5-star, and that 5-star was hailing from Superior, Wisconsin, standing at 6'7", 300 pounds. Mark Miller gets that #1 tackle rating in this recruiting class, and he is signing on the dotted line for Southeast Missouri State, who did make their first FCS playoff appearance here in year #2. Did get knocked in the first round, though. They were eliminated by Eastern Michigan, but really somebody that can move some bodies on that offensive line. He's going to provide some protection for whoever ends up winning the quarterback battle in the backfield, as, Gwen Williams, he is somebody that did end up graduating from his experience at Southeast Missouri State. Keeping it on the offensive line, we got Robbie Tyson, though, hailing from Robinson, Texas, standing at 6'4", 308 pounds. Robbie Tyson is going to also play at Northwestern State, so that's going to make it 2 #1 position players that are going to play with the Demons of Northwestern State, and that's despite the fact that they did not make the playoffs either in season #1 or in season #2 as well. So, Northwestern State, possibly a program on the rise, and certainly a team to watch out for in year number 3. But Robbie Tyson, someone that you really love to see in terms of having that really core strength. He has a 730-pound squat coming out of high school. Like that is absolutely strong. So if he is someone that can remain healthy, because with these 300-pound guys, you absolutely never know when they're going up against each other in the trenches every single play. You cannot take any plays off on the line of scrimmage. If Robbie Tyson can stay healthy, he could be a generational player potentially for Northwestern State, as he's going to help in that interior offensive line and help the new running back that is going to have the responsibility to replace Wallace Gates. And finally, rounding out the offensive side of the football, we have the #1 center in college football, hailing from Orchard South, Washington. That is JUCO blue chip Bo Scott, who, despite the fact that he would come in as a junior from the JUCO ranks, still, he's just that good. That's why he got that 5-star rating. A+ field awareness. His 40 time is under 5, so he's very athletic and very fast for an offensive lineman. So you really like to see that. He also got a 485 bench press and a 730 squat. So I'm surprised that he did not go to the FBS ranks, but this is a great pickup for North Dakota State as they continue to build upon arguably one of the best offensive lines in college football. But as for the best freshman center coming out of this recruiting class, though, that does go to Rick Nixon, hailing from Greenbelt, Maryland. He does end up signing with Georgia Southern. So up next, we got ourselves the defensive side of the football, and we started that defensive end position. Winning that #1 recruiting ranking is Chris Dixon out of Houghton, Michigan, and a little bit undersized, 6'4", 213. So you'd really like to see him bulk up a little bit, or maybe someone that could transfer over to that linebacker position. But what he's able to bring to the table is undeniable. He is very talented. 4.56 for a 40-yard dash, so he does have that athleticism necessary to play that edge rush or maybe as a stand-up linebacker if need be. Also brings solid field awareness as well. 410 on the bench press, 640 on the squat. So he does have the mobility to be a speed rusher, but can also bull rush in order to contain not only certain quarterbacks that have more mobility in the pocket, but can assist in that run defense. And this does mean that the Red Hawks of Southeast Missouri State, they get their second #1 player in this recruiting class. And keeping it going for the Red Hawks, they also get the #1 defensive tackle in the country, Jake Cook from Reserve, Louisiana, 5'11", 274 pounds. Again, someone that could be a little bit on the undersized kind of things, but very aware. He has incredible football knowledge, and that's going to play to his advantage as he makes the adjustment from going up to the high school level and playing at the college football level. He's a #1 blue chip, and that is 2 blue chip defensive linemen that Southeast Missouri State do end up signing. And plus, they're a team that made the playoff last year. They just might be really scary good. And honestly, based off what I'm seeing so far in these individual signings, might have to be a dark horse to win the national championship. I'm going to call it right now. Up next, we go over to the linebacker group, and we go to the outside linebackers. The #1 outside linebacker in the country is Michael Thompson from Medina, Ohio, standing at 6'2", 217 pounds. He ends up signing on the dotted line for the Colonels of Eastern Kentucky. And Eastern Kentucky, they were a team that was off to a hot start. They had a pretty incredible offense, but defensively they were certainly lacking, and this will really help Eastern Kentucky in that regard. But that being said, insanely quick for a linebacker, 4.29. He's got great field awareness, really good hands as well. So he's a guy that can definitely get some interceptions for you, but he really shines as a run stopper. You don't run through his gap straight up and down. He will blow you up with that 695 squat. Incredibly powerful linebacker and an instant starter for Eastern Kentucky, in my opinion. Moving on over to the middle linebacker position, and I kid you not, Southeast Missouri State, they inch another #1 player. This is their 4th #1 player in this class. Peter Whitworth, he's the #1 middle linebacker in this recruiting class, hailing from Georgetown, Kentucky. So They got 2 very strong defensive linemen, and then they also bring in a linebacker to go with it. Oh, it's going to be a long day for offenses when they go up against Southeast Missouri State, especially if all of these guys can live up to the initial hype. Now, one weakness that he does have in his game is that he doesn't have the best hands necessarily. His hands are only rated at a C rating, but he does have phenomenal field awareness, and so he's going to be able to captain a defense right away, and it won't be because of there's just no one else calling the shots. He just has that ability to take on that role day one. And I think Southeast Missouri State is going to be extremely excited about this particular signing. But now we move over to the secondary here as we start with the cornerbacks here in this year 2 recruiting class. From Middletown, Connecticut, we got Russ Arnold, who is the #1 corner in this class and brings really good size for a corner. 6'3", 178 pounds. That's going to be really helpful for those one-on-one balls in terms of attacking this defense. But, you know, he's a coverage type as well. He's not going to be someone that's going to hit you extremely hard, as his bench press is about the same as his actual weight. He stands at 178 pounds, but great ball skills. He just might not get a ton of interceptions initially because his hands are only rated at a C+. So, you know, that's something that can, of course, you know, be coached and developed. But I won't expect too many interceptions from him in year number 3. But he is somebody that, you know, he's not going to allow any touchdowns, I feel like, either, because he has the foot speed to keep up with just about anybody. Also, he ends up signing for the Delaware Blue Hens as well. Forgot to mention that, so that is, of course, a big-time signing for the University of Delaware. Up next, we have the free safeties in this year 2 recruiting class, and Southeast Missouri State gets yet another guy. Blake Mullins, he's the #1 free safety in this recruiting class, 6'6". So you want to talk about a guy that can likely cover a lot of space. It's this guy right here. Not only is he 6'6", but he also has a 4.1 40. Like, just absolutely ridiculous. He can take literally entire deep zones away. Like, the entire deep third of the field, don't even worry about it. You're going to want to do short and maybe intermediate throws if you're feeling lucky. But he's got A+ field awareness. His hands are really good as well. And that is the 4th #1 player that Southeast Missouri State signs for the defense. And they got 5 #1 players total. So, again, Southeast Missouri State, they made it to playoffs last year, and their defense is going to get significantly better through this recruiting class. As for the last skill position player that I wanted to talk about is the strong safeties here in year number 2. Gerald Moore, he is the #1 strong safety despite hailing all the way from Alaska. Eastern Illinois still was able to garner his attention, and at 6 foot 196 pounds, the Panthers are going to get a huge signing here, as he's a balanced player, can do just about anything. 4.39, A+ field awareness, A+ hands as well, can take away half the field. Wouldn't say he's as good as the free safety that Southeast Missouri State signs, but it's a #1 player, right? Like, you are excited no matter what, and Gerald Moore, look for him to make some immediate impacts on the football field for Eastern Illinois. So real quick, I wanted to go ahead and talk about the kickers and punters, as like I said, there's a few 4-star punters in this recruiting class. The #1 kicker ends up being Brian Henry from Dunning, South Carolina. He is going to sign with Georgia Southern. There is 2 other kickers that got that 4-star designation though. Vince Giltree, he signs with Northwestern State, and he's the #2 punter, or not punter, but the kicker in this recruiting class. And then Brian Marshall signs with Portland State. He's the #3 kicker and is also a 4-star player. On the other hand, for punters, there's only 1 4-star punter in this recruiting class, and not even in the United States. He's actually coming down from Canada to play for this North Dakota State squad. It's Andy Osai from Oshawa, Canada, 6'1", 186 pounds. He ends up signing for North Dakota State. And finally, who is going to be considered the #1 player in this recruiting class? It is Robbie Tyson. Surprisingly, a guard ends up being the #1 overall player. So Robbie Tyson, I said it before and I say it again, huge pickup for Northwestern State. And now that we've seen, taking a little bit of an in-depth look at the individual players in this recruiting class, let's go ahead and take a look at the team rankings here in terms of recruiting classes here in year number 2. So now we go ahead and get a chance to take a look at the #1 recruiting class in college football, and really this shouldn't be any of a surprise whatsoever. Southeast Missouri State, they dominated this recruiting cycle, and Coach Dybergian did one heck of a job here. He ends up signing 6 5-star players, 9 4-stars, so 15 blue chips out of 25 total signings. No surprise whatsoever that they end up with the #1 recruiting class. And this is a team as well that, does end up, they made the playoffs last year. They finished close to double-digit wins. And now maybe with this additional help here, they got to work out some things at the quarterback and running back position. But that being said, Southeast Missouri State, I would not be shocked if I saw them again in the playoffs here in year number 3. As for North Dakota State, even though they didn't have as good of a season as they had last year, they end up signing a better recruiting class. Not because their first recruiting class was bad necessarily, nothing like that, but they end up signing 3 5-stars. It's going to be headlined by Justin Fernie, Bo Scott, and Dan Birch, 2 of which are offensive linemen. It's turning into a offensive line factory at North Dakota State. But defending Pac-10 champions will look to go back to the FCS playoffs in year number 3. And with these 3 5-star players and the #2 overall recruiting class, should be able to accomplish that here in year 3. As for Eastern Kentucky, they are still looking for their first FCS playoff appearance in this series so far, and this recruiting class will certainly help in that regard. They end up signing 2 5-stars, and their top 3 players are all on the defensive side of football, which was their weaker side. Offensively, they were pretty solid in that regard. Just the lack of defense was why they went from, I believe it was 5-1 at some point, to 6-5. So they collapsed in that second half extremely hard. But, that being said though, Eastern Kentucky, they signed this #3 recruiting class, and we'll see if that is enough to push them in terms of helping them make it to the FCS playoffs for the very first time. Now, last season, James Madison was able to sign the #1 recruiting class in all of college football. And while they did not accomplish that here in year number 2, they still signed an extremely strong recruiting class, once again being in the top 5, signing 24 players, one of which is a 5-star headlined by Paul Gandy, hailing from Pulaski, Virginia, and was part of that Elite 11 challenge. So that's really cool to see. Also has Mike Sanders to throw the ball to, and Kenny Mitchell. Paul Gandy is going to be an interesting person to watch because he will be walking into a quarterback battle, considering Kenny Raymer, he has graduated, so there is a hole at the quarterback position. As for Montana, while they do not sign any 5-star players, they do still manage to sign the number 5 class, as Montana ends up with 10 4-stars, headlined by Charles Butler, Jacob Cade, and Brian Fawn. Montana sneaking into that AP poll, even though they did not make it into the playoffs. They will look to return back here in year number 3. Up next, we have Northwestern State, who, no surprises, did end up signing a top 10 class. And that is knowing that Robbie Tyson is the #1 player in America, so that really helps in that regard. The Demons end up signing 21 total players, 10 of which being blue chip caliber guys. And they really did a fantastic job of revamping that offensive line. Not only did they sign Robbie Tyson, but they also signed Ron Bennett and Gerald Horn as well, both of which are 4-star players in their own right. So, you want to talk about beefing up that offensive line. If you can control the trenches, you can control the game, and that is what Northwestern State is aiming to do. As for the New Hampshire Wildcats, while they were the champions of the ACC conference, they were knocked out early as they ran into the Cinderella that is Idaho Now, New Hampshire did not sign any 5-star players in this recruiting class, but still 7 blue chips that they end up bringing in. 3 of their top players all being on the defensive side of football. Eric Taylor and Travis James are going to both look to clog up the middle and have impacts in their freshman campaigns. While John Conway is the middle linebacker hailing from Myrtle Grove, North Carolina. He is also a 4-star player and someone to watch out for as well, as he has some insane talent. We'll see if they can live up to those 4-star designations. As for Sacramento State, they bring in the number 9 recruiting class. Despite a rough year for them on the football field, 4-7 matter of fact, it does help that they are located in the state of California, but they do really beef up that running game. They bring in both Willie Hendricks and Jason McCall to add on to this running back core, where their leading rusher only rushed for 500 yards over the course of the season. So they're going to look to upgrade in that regard. But Chris Booker, best player in this recruiting class, really excited to see what he can do, as Sacramento State, they're looking for their first FCS playoff appearance. Georgia Southern, meanwhile, year number 1, we saw them lose in the second round, and this year they move a little bit farther. They move on to the quarterfinals before being eliminated by UL Monroe. They end up signing 2 5-stars in Mark Butler and Rick Nixon, both of which on the offensive side of the football. And then their best defensive player ends up being Xavier Wilson from Myrtle Grove, Florida. Georgia Southern, they end up signing number 10 class. Also signing a top 25 class is South Carolina State, who is going to capitalize off of their first FCS playoff appearance by signing the number 11 recruiting class. He ends up with 1 5-star, and that is Damian Porter from Edgewater, Florida. Also watch out for Bradley King and Seth Johnson, who are also on the defensive side of football and are considered top signings for South Carolina State. As for Western Carolina, despite the fact that they are on 2-year probation, so they only have 15 scholarships to work with, Western Carolina still puts together a really strong class. Number 12 class in the country, despite only signing 13 players. Michael Young was a really huge add. I believe he is a JUCO transfer. And then Derek Powell on the defensive side of football, hailing from Chicago, Illinois. He's going to be a ball hawk day 1 as well. As will Randall Nash, who will look to make an immediate impact for the Catamounts, as they are looking to navigate the waters of the next couple of seasons, as they will not be able to participate in the FCS playoffs for year 3 or in year number 4. Tennessee State, however, does not have to deal with such sanctions, as Chris Nelson is the only 5-star signing that the Tigers end up garnering. But that being said, still a strong class, number 13 in the country. They also finish close to the top 10 in the AP poll, ends up number 11. They do also sign Will Hicks and Dylan Thomas, who will have an opportunity to compete for that starting job, as Michael Berry, who was a senior quarterback, the senior starter for Tennessee State, he does end up leaving due to graduation. Texas State, while not signing any 5-star players, they still end up with the number 14 class. They end up with 7 4-stars, including Tyler James, Barrett Williams, and Obadiah Church, 2 of which are going to be on that interior defensive line to help out in the trenches. Tyler James, meanwhile, solid 4-star tight end, could very well be a very good red zone threat here for the Tigers. Or not the Tigers, but the Bobcats of Texas State. Arkansas Pine Bluff, however, seems to be a program that is on the up and up, as they sign the number 15 recruiting class in college football. Arkansas Pine Bluff last year, they were in position to win the conference, but it just didn't end up that way, unfortunately. They do end up with a 1 5-star player in Jermaine Singleton, though, who's a guard from Alamo, Texas. And they also signed a couple of nice players. George Espinoza, he's the quarterback hailing from Arlington, Texas. Their quarterback is not coming back, who started for them last year, so that competition is going to be open. And then Cedric Alford will also look to make an immediate impact as a 4-star from Sugar Land, Texas. Alcorn State also rode their high momentum going into the offseason, and they end up signing the number 16 overall class, as they signed 2 pretty solid quarterbacks in Jonathan Anthony and Matt Seward. And that's going to be really interesting, because Travis Wilkerson, he's still coming back and he's still going to be on this football team. But that being said, Jonathan Anthony and Matt Seward could both potentially be potential heirs to when the Travis Wilkerson era does end up coming to an end. Alcorn State with the number 16 class. Texas Southern also, despite not having their full scholarships, they were limited to 15 this offseason. They still put together the number 17 overall class. Texas Southern, they end up with one 5-star in Dan Griffin, hailing from Galveston, Texas. Again, another program like Western Carolina that's going to have to navigate these next couple of seasons. They're not going to have as many scholarships, and they're also have the issue of they're not going to be in the FCS playoffs for year number 3 or year number 4. So hopefully they enjoyed that year 2 playoff appearance, because it's going to be a little bit before they come back. They did also sign Kelly Harris and Ronnie Blumenthal, who I am personally excited about as a number 17 recruiting class. At number 18, we got Nicole State, who is considered on the rise as they sign a recruiting class that is capable of garnering an FCS playoff appearance. At 6-5, but 6-2 in conference play, they will look to go to a better start here overall as they sign John Johnson, who is a 5-star defensive lineman from Estelle, Louisiana. Tommy Cooper and J.J. Brown is part of 7 4-stars that also joined this team, looking to help Frederick McNair as well as Deuce Randolph get their first playoff appearance for Nicole State. At number 19, despite finishing under 500, is Eastern Illinois, and that is headlined by the number 1 strong safety in America, Gerald Moore, who is that number 1 strong safety. They do also sign 2 other 4-star players, both of which will help on the offensive line, in Tony Hargrove and Chris Johnson as well, number 19 in this recruiting class. Chattanooga also beefs up its recruiting as well as they sign the number 20 recruiting class in college football, led by 5 blue chips, 3 of which are Jesse Campbell, who's going to be on that interior defensive line, as well as 2 wide receivers that will look to live up to what John Reed was able to accomplish the last couple of seasons, in Ricky Pino from Hanover Park, Illinois, and Kyle Taylor from Centerville, Utah. So it's going to be interesting to see how that how they live up to that particular billing. That's some big, massive shoes to fill. Eastern Washington, however, despite again finishing under 500 and a little bit behind some of these other Pac-10 programs, they still sign a really good class. Number 21 in the country. Terrell Barrett is the headline for this class. He's the only 5-star that Eastern Washington was able to sign. All the way from Hawaii, he's going to cross the Pacific Ocean to play in the continental United States and play for Eastern Washington. But 2 other players to watch out for EWU that did not have to do the same thing is Kyle Lester of Lake Oswego, Oregon, and then also in the home state of Washington, James Smith playing at that defensive back position as well. So then rounding out this top 25 group, we do have Montana State, who does end up with the number 23 recruiting class, led by their fullback Anthony Hopkins, as well as 2 additional weapons on the offensive side of the ball, Joel Fine and Donald Adams, who are both slated to play wide receiver and are 4-star players. Tennessee Martin, who had arguably one of the most disappointing seasons in terms of expectations for year number 2. They still end up with the number 24 recruiting class despite finishing just 3-8. It was truly an ugly season for the Skyhawks, but David Alexander and Donnie Jacobs, both of which are quarterbacks, they're going to come in and challenge Brad Smith, who is not bad experience, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions last year, so it could be a quarterback battle there. And then their best defensive signing does end up being Corey McClellan from Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan, and he is also a 4-star guy. And then finally, rounding out the top 25, we got Murray State, who does end up signing the 25th rated class in college football. Also finishing below 500, they finished 5-6. They do end up signing 2 4-stars, Bobby Mitchell at the quarterback position, and then Brandon Hill at defensive end. And then this class is actually made up of a bunch of 3-star players as well. Now, if you guys are curious with what Kent State has done with their recruiting, so you would think being the defending national champions 2 times running would help in recruiting, but honestly, that really hasn't happened, to be honest with you, and that's been kind of a surprise Kent State, they only signed one 4-star player in RJ Hart, who is a guard from Dayton, Ohio. They do sign a couple of other guys from Ohio. Mabel Heights, you got Donnie Presley, and then Greg Jaquise. He's a running back from Xenia. But really, other than that, they really struggle with recruiting. Most of their guys are actually going to be 2- and 1-star prospects. So it'll be interesting to see how long Kent State can keep this up. But right now, in terms of what they're doing for recruiting, it's not looking that good. But the most surprising thing to me when I see these team rankings is how bad Brown did in recruiting this year. They are 2-time defending Ivy League champions, and they also won a playoff game. They actually won a playoff game. Now, their season did end on a sour note when they did lose to Georgia Southern, but you know, they're not sanctioned or anything, but they only signed 14 players in this recruiting class, and only 2 of them are 3-star or higher. They end up with a number 108 recruiting class, which is really surprising to me, in my opinion. They do end up saying J.R. Johnson, who I really like. He's from Floral Park, New York, and then Terrell Andrews is a solid player as well. Coming out of high school, he does have a 3-star designation and is from Penn Hills, Pennsylvania. But again, like Kent State, most of their guys are 2- and 1-star players, so not really something ideal. If this is just a one-time thing, they could overcome it. But if you guys remember from season number 1, they didn't exactly sign the best class either. So I'm really interested to see, you know, what the ceiling of Brown really is as a team that, you know, they're part of a university that has to emphasize academics because they are a part of the Ivy League and they're one of the most elite universities in college football. And finally, the program that finishes in last place in terms of putting together a good recruiting class is the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Now, they did almost pull the upset on New Hampshire at the beginning of the season, but you know, not a great year for the Kangaroos. They do finish 2-9 with a 2-6 conference record, so not really ideal by any means. They only signed 6 2-star players and then 8 1-star guys as well, so definitely a disappointing aspect. But as you can see, there's 119 schools in this dynasty, so I didn't want to do a deep dive into each individual team. So if you guys wanted to see how your favorite school did, I will have that linked in a pinned comment as well, so you guys can see, you know, how many players, you know, each individual school has brought in terms of being an actual FCS school, as well as we're going to take a look and see how many returning players there are in this dynasty to go with it. But since we happen to be on the topic of custom players, one of your custom guys, he wasn't a notable transfer by any means, but he does end up going into the transfer portal, and instead of being at North Dakota, where his collegiate career did originate from, he is actually going to Grambling State now. Now, while he'll still be the backup quarterback here at Grambling State like he was at North Dakota, he still is given a better opportunity overall, because the only person that's in front of him right now in the depth chart is Joe Overstreet. And while he's an extremely talented quarterback, he is a senior redshirt that is going to be set to graduate after this upcoming season. So what's going to happen is Octavian Cador and Joe Hunter, they're going to be in a quarterback battle next season, and Cador, he'll have the chance to actually be the guy. So I think this is a good move for Cador overall, and he also has been approved to play immediately. So if need be, for some reason, if either Overstreet gets hurt, or if he's having a bad day, or even if it's a blowout in either direction, Cador can come in and get some game experience. Since he doesn't have a lot of it, he only had a handful of pass attempts in his true freshman campaign. But guys, that is going to wrap things up here, as we are closing in on yet another amazing season of the FCS Dynasty. And next episode, what I'm going to do, we're going to have the preseason episode for year number 3. We're going to take a look at the top 25 polls for this upcoming season in terms of preseason expectations, as well as the preseason All-Americans and the Heisman Watch to start off this season. not to mention a official review of your custom prospects. For those of you that did end up submitting a guy for season 3, we will also go ahead and see where your guy ends up. So gonna be a really exciting episode. I hope you don't miss a single thing, and if you're excited for it, man, I need you to go ahead and do me a favor. Smack that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel. This is John J Gaming on the mic signing off, but I'm hoping you're all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.